Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at the business of sports, brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'm here to coach you through the financial game. We'll look beyond the headlines, analyze all the latest sports news, the teams, trades, and billion-dollar deals, so you and your portfolio will win big. This week, we are taking a look at David Beckham and the revenue being brought in by his name-branded businesses, checking out the PGA Tour's new media studios, and previewing the money behind the NFL playoffs, which kick off this weekend. I'll also be joined by Professional Sports Authenticator, or PSA President, Ryan Hogue, to talk about the business behind sports trading cards and memorabilia. All right, let's huddle up and get right into it. It's time for this week's Pomps Playbook, where I take a look at some of the biggest headlines in sports that you and your portfolio need to know. The first topic I want to talk about today is David Beckham's branded businesses paying out huge dividends. So the headline here is that David Beckham's holding company, DRJB Holdings, has paid out $124 million in dividends since 2022. But the real story is that David Beckham is leveraging a unique partnership to turn his name, image, and likeness into a billion-dollar brand. You see, David Beckham previously did all of his marketing and licensing deals out of a holding company called DRJB Holdings. Beckham built this company up over the course of a decade, using it to house everything from his production business to endorsement deals with companies like Boss, Stella Artois, Paramount, and others. Beckham then sold a 55% stake in this business to Authentic Brands Group for about $270 million in 2022, with Beckham's other company, Footwork Productions, keeping the remaining 45% stake in the business. Authentic Brands Group currently owns the image rights to many famous public figures like Muhammad Ali, Elvis Presley, and Marilyn Monroe, and the rights to brands like Reebok and Sports Illustrated. So Beckham essentially told Authentic Brands Group to monetize his brand better than he was already doing it. And it has worked out beautifully, as Beckham is said to have personally be entitled to $36 million of the $124 million in dividend payments since 2022. A lot of this money has come through brand partnerships, but DRJB Holdings is also responsible for the production company that made the hit Netflix documentary last year called Beckham. So between the success of DRJB Holdings and Beckham's ownership stake in Major League Soccer's Inter Miami, which is valued by Sportico at just over $1 billion itself, business has been pretty good for Beckham since he retired from soccer in 2013, and his brand is now more popular than ever. The second item in today's playbook is a look ahead to the Australian Open, the first tennis major this year, which starts on January 12th. The total prize money for this year's Australian Open has been set at $59.9 million, a 12% increase from 2024. The winner of the men's and women's singles championship will each take home $2.17 million. And there are quite a few storylines to watch this year. For starters, the 2024 singles champions, Aryna Sabalenka and Jannik Sinner, will look to defend their crowns at this year's tournament. Naomi Osaka, who won the Australian Open in 2021, looks to regain top form since returning to tennis in 2024 and exiting the 2024 Australian Open in the first round. Novak Djokovic will compete in his first major tournament under new coach, three-time Grand Slam winner and tennis legend Andy Murray, as he looks to seek his record 11th Australian Open title. World number 3 Carlos Alcaraz will look to add an Australian Open title to his trophy case, as the Australian Open is the only major the 21-year-old has yet to win in his already impressive career. Australians' own Nick Kyrgios, arguably the most polarizing player in tennis, will return to the Australian Open for the first time in 2 years. And the Australian Open itself is a massive event for the local area, accounting for $355 million in economic impact in 2024 and over $2 billion the past 10 years, according to a recent study by Nielsen Sports. The last topic for this week's playbook is the PGA Tour's new media studio. On New Year's Day, the PGA Tour unveiled its new media studios. The new studios, which have been in the works since 2017, are in a massive 165,000 square foot building located in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, next to the PGA Tour's headquarters. The new studio facility can hold up to 300 employees and includes 8 production rooms, 8 audio control rooms, 7 LED outfitted studios, a 34-seat theater for project screening, and studio-specific booths for podcasts. To compare that to the old studio, the PGA Tour's former media studio only had 1 studio and 1 production control room. This is also going to have a custom video review center that can be used for live on-air rulings during actual tournaments. Overall, the PGA Tour will use the studios to boost its digital presence, expand its international broadcast fees for events, and bolster its ESPN Plus PGA Tour live coverage. The studios will also be used to produce content for PGA Tour social platforms, digital platforms, network partners, and also, of course, sponsors. The new media studios will also help the tour highlight its improved in-house distribution capabilities for its broadcast partners for potential new media rights deals as they come available after 2030. This week for the deeper dive, where I give you a play-by-play analysis of news in the sports world and its significance to your bottom line, we're talking about the money behind the NFL playoffs, which kick off this weekend. For those of you who haven't been up to speed, the NFL playoffs start this weekend with the wild card round. There will be 2 games on Saturday, 3 games on Sunday, and 1 game on Monday. But how much money does the NFL, its teams, and its players actually make during the playoffs? Well, the answer is it's complicated. For starters, the NFL league office gets to keep nearly all ticket revenue from playoff games. Instead of keeping that revenue, they give both home and away teams a stipend for travel and stadium operation costs. The home team does still get to keep a smaller portion of concession and parking revenue, which typically amounts to anywhere between $1 million to $2 million per game. But that's a much smaller piece of the overall pie, as ticket revenue for NFL playoff games can reach more than $10 million for one individual game. This is much different than any other sports league in North America, as MLB teams get to keep 40% of ticket revenue throughout the playoffs. NHL teams get to keep 65% of playoff ticket revenue, and NBA teams are all the way at the top, keeping 75% of playoff ticket revenue. Fun fact, that's one of the reasons why Golden State's valuation has increased so much in the NBA over the last few decades, because they've constantly been making deep playoff runs, keeping 75% of that ticket revenue every year. But this structure also ends up impacting player compensation in the NFL. Player compensation only covers the regular season because not every team makes it to the playoffs. So, to compensate players for playing in additional games, the NFL pays players a check based on how far their team makes it in the playoffs. According to the most recent collective bargaining agreement, NFL players will be paid $49,500 for wildcard games, $54,500 for divisional round games, $77,000 for conference championship games, and anywhere between $96,000 for losing the Super Bowl to $171,000 if your team wins the Super Bowl. This money comes from the playoff ticket revenue pool. And while it's great money for some guys, it can be a huge drop-off for superstar players. Take Patrick Mahomes, for instance. He earns nearly $3 million each regular season game via a game check. But he'll only be paid $54,500 for his first playoff game this NFL postseason. Although you shouldn't feel too bad for the players. They still get roughly half of all league-wide revenue, including the $10 billion that the NFL receives annually from its TV deals, which of course the playoffs are a part of. The NFL has also sold a streaming exclusive playoff game to Amazon this year for $120 million, which of course the players will get a piece of. While most NFL fans probably already have Amazon because of its shopping benefits and Thursday Night Football contract, the e-commerce company is hoping to replicate Peacock's performance last year, when the streaming company generated 2.8 million signups during its exclusive NFL playoff game between the Kansas City Chiefs and Miami Dolphins. Now, one important reminder here is that these games will be free on television in the local broadcast markets. So Amazon will have the national rights, but they'll be free in the local markets. And signups aren't the only way for Amazon to make back some of its money, as 30-second commercials typically sell for 7 figures during the playoffs, generating even more money for the e-commerce company. We've made it to the one-on-one, a conversation where I get to break down news and sports with a key player in the industry. This week, I'm joined by Professional Sports Authenticator, or PSA President, Ryan Hogue. Ryan, how are you?
Hi, Joe. I'm doing great.
Awesome. So I'd love to start with just an overview of what PSA actually does for people who may not be as ingrained in the sports card space.
Sure. Our core business, we do several things, but our core business is authenticating and grading trading cards, both sports and non-sport cards like Pokemon. What that means is customers will send them to one of our facilities, our offices. Our experts will assess if it's a real item, and then assign it a numeric grade on a scale of 1 to 10, encapsulate it in a plastic holder, put that rating on the label. And here's an example. You can see one in my hand here. This Marshawn Lynch card happens to be rated an 8. And then what that does is it protects and preserves the card in the secure holder, and it adds additional liquidity based on the scarcity of the card. So obviously, the higher the grade, the more rare it is, and usually the more valuable it is. And so it's easier to transact those on marketplaces like eBay.
And how has this grading system evolved over the years?
The company started in 1991, and it was a slow kind of growth story for the first decade. And then in the last, I would say, 7 years, it started in mid-2018, where things really started accelerating and you started seeing digital tools come into play, more people coming into the hobby interest, both from kind of a nostalgia angle where maybe they collected as a kid and they've got a little more disposable income, so they come back into something that they enjoyed when they were younger. And then the community aspects, I think, is another key angle where you've got people that are bonding over common things. Maybe they collect the same player, the same sport. They'll do in-person type events. You've got shows and conventions that draw hundreds of thousands of people. And so it's become much more of a mainstream industry versus, say, a niche hobby, throughout the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, and talk to me a little bit about demand over the years, right? You mentioned 2018, but I know COVID was a huge moment for the industry as well. I imagine you guys are grading, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of cards, creating a backlog of certain things. What kind of demand have you guys seen over the years, and how has that changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you look back historically, it took about 24 years for PSA to grade 25 million cards. And then just last year, we graded over 15 million cards. And we experienced a massive surge during COVID. Obviously, people stuck at home, sports not happening. A lot of people connected with their favorite sports teams and athletes through the trading cards. They were, stuck at home, discovered old collections maybe, in their closet, wanted to see if they were valuable. And so at the peak of the COVID backlog, I think we had about 13 million cards that had been submitted to us that were in the building. That was in a period of about maybe 15 months. So to put that in perspective, 25 million cards in 24 years versus, we had 13 million cards in 15 months. And so we had a challenge ahead of us to be able to scale up the infrastructure, both people, technology, facilities, and expertise in order to handle the increased demand. And so that's what we've really been focused on the last 4 years or so at the company.
And is PSA still primarily using humans to grade these cards, or are they using artificial intelligence too?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We actually are still using humans to do all the grading, but I would describe it as tech assisted. So we have AI type solutions employed in a lot of steps in our process. We image every card before and after grading, so that'll help with things like identifying what card it is. So our research team has an easier job knowing, if it's, let's say, a gold shimmer variant versus the gold wave or true gold refractor. We also do counterfeit detection. We can help with centering. So computers are really good at math, and so they can measure borders and determine centering ratios to help inform the grader if the centering falls within a certain range to say, hey, it's 8 centering, 9 centering, 10 centering. And then we have a lot of other tools that we're leveraging on the collector side, not necessarily with our operation, to make submitting to us easier, using some of the same technology as far as image capture, valuation services, research tools, and whatnot.
All right, we've got to take a quick break, but we'll be back with Ryan Hogue right after this. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. I'm here with PSA President Ryan Hogue. So Ryan, one of the things that I've noticed specifically during COVID, but also over the last number of years, is that trading cards have become an entirely new investable asset class. People are buying and trading these things with the expectation of profit in some cases. What, if anything, is PSA doing to assist in that process?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There's definitely a lot of consumers out there that have taken more of that kind of financial investment bend to their collecting. And we've done a lot of different things over the last few years to cater more to that audience and those types of customers. We purchased a company about 4 years ago called Card Ladder. And so Card Ladder is one of the leading research tools out on the market. They track valuation. They have kind of predictive pricing as well as historical sales for tens of millions of trading cards. And so we've got that integrated into a lot of the kind of core PSA collection management and also submission experiences, and that's a great tool for collectors to use. And we've also invested in new capabilities to provide more liquidity to customers. So we created this thing called the PSA Vault that we launched in the summer of 2022, and then last year we added the ability to integrate with eBay to sell your trading cards at both auction and at fixed price. And so what this is, it's a physical facility in Delaware where you can have your trading cards stored securely, be able to sell them with a single tap on your phone or a couple clicks of the mouse, so that, let's say, a player goes off, has a great game, and you want to get that thing listed. You can have it listed that night. It'll sell immediately, and then we actually take care of all the fulfillment and processing of that. So it's a way to have more friction-free selling, easier, and you can time the market. And so expect to see continued innovation like that around different liquidity options that we're going to provide to those customers that are really kind of focused on the investment side.
So it kind of seems like that's more like a brokerage account, right? Where you're not actually taking delivery of the inventory. It's sitting in what we would call like a bank account of sorts, and then you're
Yeah.
paying a transaction fee for storage or shipping or whatever it is.
Yeah. Very, very similar. Yeah, that's actually a really good analogy. A lot of people they want to speculate on say a rookie player. Maybe they're going to have a great upcoming season, so they kind of load up, and then when they start to get hot, they want to take some profits, so to speak, on these. And yeah, they don't necessarily have any interest in taking physical possession of those cards. And so the PSA Vault and our services are a great platform for them to utilize for their collecting and investing needs.
One of the things I'm curious about is with NIL, that whole process happening in college, players now able to earn money off their name, image, and likeness, how that's impacted your business, but also the trading card business overall.
Yeah, if you rewound, say, 3 or 4 years ago, very rarely would you find a trading card of a non-professional athlete. And now it's becoming, some of our more popular categories that we're seeing. I personally actually picked up a Cam Scadaboo card, Arizona State's running back. I'm an ASU alum. Picked one up around the holidays on eBay, and that never would have been possible, 5 years ago. So it's pretty cool to see these. You have Caitlin Clark, who obviously is probably the marquee name there as far as NIL and having her in her Iowa Hawkeyes uniform on trading cards. And so I expect this to continue as a category where people almost view it as is the true rookie card or maybe the pre-rookie card. So if you want to kind of get their first exposure, it's not necessarily just their first professional uniform, which will always have a certain standing and weight that people want to chase that. But if somebody wants to speculate and kind of get these prospect cards, that's where I start seeing some of the NIL cards come into play, and Topps with their Bowman brand have done a nice job with these.
I love the Scadaboo pickup. He had a heck of a game in the bowl game there. But one of the things I'm curious about is your partnership with GameStop. You guys signed a deal with GameStop, I believe, in the fall of 2024, where you're now going to allow people to authenticate and grading services for their trading cards at GameStop locations. Why was it important to have physical retail spaces rather than just allowing people to ship them to you?
Yeah, the GameStop partnership is actually a pretty unique one for us. We know with the services that we provide, there's a lot of folks that have questions. This is why when we go to shows like the National Sports Collectors Convention that's at the end of July every year, we have thousands of people come up and will submit cards to us. Oftentimes they're first time submitters because they want to talk to an expert. In our case, it's a PSA employee to help guide them through the process, or they have concerns with dropping a valuable card in the mail and potentially having it get lost or damaged or whatnot. And so that's where the GameStop partnership really came into play, is they have a massive retail presence of these brick and mortar stores all over the country. And they felt like it was a nice move for them because there's some crossover, I think, with their core audience that are focused on video games. And we viewed it as very complementary for us as a way to extend into markets where we don't have a presence, or there's maybe not a card show that PSA is attending, or we don't already have an established dealer partner in that market with a local hobby shop. And so we're 3 months into the partnership. I think we're very excited with the early trends and numbers that we're seeing, and excited to see continued growth there in 2025 and beyond.
I feel like I need a prediction for the trading card industry this upcoming year.
Um, wow. Well, probably the biggest thing happening in the trading card industry is going to be this fall when Fanatics officially secures the NBA license for both teams and players. Panini has had that for the last 14, 15 years. And that deal is expiring. I believe it's in September, or October. And so I think that we're going to see a surge of interest in officially licensed NBA cards under the Topps brand and other brands that they choose to publish cards under. And so I think we're in for another strong year. Q4 2024 ended on a very strong note. We saw continued growth both in units, new customers coming in compared to the previous year, and we think those trends are going to continue as more people kind of get into collecting or get back into collecting.
I think that's a fair assessment because Fanatics seems to have their hands in everything these days. But thanks so much for joining us, Ryan.
Thanks, Joe.
The clock is winding down here, but we have just enough time for some final buzz. So I want to wrap up today's episode by talking about the Goodyear blimp. You may have seen on recent college football playoff broadcasts that this year is the 100th anniversary of the Goodyear blimp and the 70th of the blimp's aerial coverage, which started at the Rose Bowl in 1955. Now, the details behind the Goodyear blimp are fascinating. The blimp itself is 250 feet long. It weighs more than 20,000 pounds. It can travel at speeds of excess of 70 miles per hour, and it costs $100,000 to fly during an event. However, there are only 17 full-time blimp pilots left in the United States. Goodyear started using the Goodyear blimp for advertising all the way back in 1925. Then, in 1955, NBC wanted to strap a camera on a Goodyear blimp to capture aerial footage of the 1955 Rose Bowl parade. And the rest, as they say, is history. The Goodyear blimp has spent the last 7 decades covering over 2,500 sporting events, including iconic events like the Olympics, Super Bowl, NBA Finals, World Series, Stanley Cup, Daytona 500, Indianapolis 500, Kentucky Derby, and even some Formula One races. Now, Goodyear has 4 blimps stationed at different air bases all across the United States to ensure event coverage. These are in Ohio, Florida, and California. Each blimp has 3 pilots that work in shifts, taking turns doing takeoff and landing, which requires 20 employees, an 18-wheeler, and several vans. But Goodyear doesn't actually get paid for its TV coverage. Instead, they agree to pay all of the expenses, about $100,000 per flight, including travel, equipment, employees, and more, in exchange for TV time during the world's biggest sporting events. Think of it as a marketing expense. And while some speculate that the Goodyear blimp might not be around much longer with drone technology taking over, it has already left its mark. The Goodyear blimp was the first non-player or coach to be inducted into College Football Hall of Fame. We're all out of time, so it's officially game over for this week. Thank you so much to Ryan Hogue and for all of you for joining us. Make sure to tune into Yahoo Finance Sports Reports on Thursdays at 5 p.m. wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.